Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Thanks for tuning in to the GSMC Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Chambers. I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in the world, staying safe and healthy. But it is that time to get that blanket, that favorite drink that you want, or even that special fur friend, and just cuddle up because it's time to talk travel. That's right. And today we're going to be talking about trips that you can take or should take in your 30s, a trip that you might want to take in your 40s, and even one in your 50s. But stick around to the end of the show because I'm going to talk about 10 of the most expensive trips that you could possibly take. So let's dive right in. I know that everyone talks about age just being a number, right? But when it comes to traveling, the older we get, the more that we tend to feel like we need to be doing certain things in our trips at certain times, right? We all have those moments. Some of us, our timelines are different. So these are, like I say, these are suggestions and things based on about my life personally and for, a general statement for those, for the average person. Because some of the trips you might think that we're talking about are, I could easily take this trip in my 50s or 40s or 70s or 80s. And that is fantastic, and I don't want to stop anyone from doing that. You always want to make sure that your health and your safety and well-being and mindset are all where it needs to be before you go on any trip. So, like I say, these are just suggestions. So don't go strictly off of these, but I'm just going to throw them out there because I think they're a pretty good measuring stick. I mean, I'm approaching my 40s. I'm in there. I'm getting closer. Right now I'm still loving the 30s, but I'm getting pretty closer. And some of these I got a chance to take when I was a little bit younger, but definitely as I get older, my priorities shift a little bit. So let's kind of start with our 30s. The first thing we're going to talk about are some trips that you can take with your 30s. And there's so many. There are so many. And I'm going to recommend going to China. And specifically going to Beijing, China, because if you go to Beijing, you will be able to walk along the Great Wall. That's right. It is an amazing experience. Now, this is coming personally from me. I loved it. I was in my mid to late 20s. I was close to my 30s when I did this. And the reason that I recommend that taking this trip either closer to your 30s or in that realm is that we tend to have a little bit more energy in our 30s sometimes. Not saying that we can't have more energy, but we do. And there's a lot of walking because you think that this is going to be, it's like an attraction. Man, the steps are huge. When you are walking up some of those steps, they are almost the length of like my entire leg. And it was some pretty big steps going all the way and getting all the way to the top. And then once you get to one of the top spots, and there are several different locations along the Great Wall that you can go, you are just walking, and you're walking for forever, it seems like. There's only been a few people that have walked the entire thing, like a handful in the world. So you don't have to worry about that. But as much time as you want to spend up there, you can decide on your own. There are sections of the wall that you can take a cable car up to, but half the experience is really going and walking up the steps. And by the time you get to the top of the section that we were at, it was exhausting. I'm not going to lie, it was exhausting for anyone. But everyone always says, well, it's just a wall. What's so great about it? Why should I even go to China to visit this? It is considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. And for a few reasons. One, it's the longest man-made structure in the world. I mean, that's impressive as it is. It has a lot of significance to it. It was important in defending China from northern invasions for centuries. That was kind of the importance of it. And it has become a national symbol for China, and it's also one of the top tourist attractions there as well. The Great Wall was built in the 14th through 17th centuries A.D. during the Ming Dynasty. That's right, 14th through 17th century A.D. That is extremely old. I mean, imagine just being able to tangibly walk along something of that magnitude, of that age length. You're walking along where people thousands of years ago walked along, and it's a really neat experience. It stretches across more than 4,000 miles of northern China. That's right, 4,000 miles. I didn't stutter when I said that. I mean, that pretty much covers twice the distance from Seattle to Chicago, if that gives you any idea. So this is a really neat experience. It does take a lot of energy, and depending what time of year you go, it can be a little taxing on you. I was there in August, and August in Beijing is very hot. It was probably about 89 to 90 degrees at about 10 a.m. or 10:30 in the morning when we were there. So it gets very warm very quickly at certain times of the year. Now, you can definitely go at a different time of year, avoid peak seasons and crowds and things like that. But again, it's going to take a lot of walking. There's going to be a lot of transferring and things like that. And if you are just wanting to kind of sit, relax, and do not a whole lot on your trip or be stress-free a little bit less, this can get a little taxing to do. It's very rewarding. That's why I'm recommending it in your 30s. I think that it's something that everyone, if you can, should do. It's just experience a part of the world and history that has stood the test of time. But when you're in China, the Great Wall is not the only thing to see. The Forbidden City is another recommendation that I'm going to throw out there. And this is it's a little easier and a little less taxing if you're not a big hiker or you don't like to walk as much. But just as much on your feet type of atmosphere that's going to be going on. It's close to the heart of the city in Beijing. And everyone asks, why is it called the Forbidden City? And it's the Forbidden City because commoners at the time were forbidden to be in there. This was where the former imperial palaces were. So members that were not in the imperial family or their servants were not allowed in this city. So it's a very cool experience to go. And again, a lot of stepping back in time when you go to these. And that was the biggest thing and the neatest thing that I found about the Great Wall and the Forbidden City specifically, because when you walked in, it took your breath away just a little bit, because you see pictures and you prepare yourself and but then when you're actually there, it just hits you. Again, that's the brilliance of traveling and seeing places like this. And when we were there, it started to rain. That not hard rain, but just kind of rain, and so a lot of people weren't wanting to go, and we went anyway. It wasn't pouring down, but it was just kind of a nice drizzle, so we had an umbrella. But the square inside the Forbidden City, when we walked in, because everyone was kind of sticking under the walkways around the city, there wasn't anyone really hanging out in the square and walking freely around the city like you can in the courtyards. And it just looked very empty, and it was a really neat experience, and I felt like I was back in time at that point. The Forbidden City, and this is a fun fact that I found out about the Forbidden City, it is said that there are a total of 9,999 rooms. Yes, and you ask, well, why not adding one more room and having an even 10,000? Because for me, that would kind of bug me. But there was a reason for that. So instead, the reason they didn't have 10,000 rooms was because it was a half room less, because only God of heaven could be entitled to 10,000 rooms. That's what they believed at the time. So that's why the room had only $9,999. Now there are rooms like the throne room in certain areas around the city that you can look into but are roped off. They don't allow anyone to go in there. But it's still a very unique experience to visit, and highly, highly recommended if you're going to China, because not only do you have the Great Wall, you now have the Forbidden City, both just pieces of time that you want to check out. And there's a lot around when you're in the heart of the city to do, but I'm going to throw out one more recommendation while you're in Beijing. And this is all in Beijing because China is so big. There's so many different places and things to go see. This was one of the cities I feel you're going to do the most trekking through for a big city, because everything is a little bit spread out and you're going to be taking transfers to and from, or renting a car or taking a taxi, and then you're on top of all that, then you're going to be, walking a lot. There's just so much to do and get to, but that's kind of how it is. And hiking is a very big deal in Asia in general. I mean, there's a lot of avid hikers, enthusiasts that love it. So the outdoors and all of these temples and places that you can visit, they're just very big and spread out. So another suggestion on this trip would be to visit the Temple of Heaven. Now, this is an imperial complex of religious buildings that is situated in the southeastern part of central Beijing. The complex was visited by emperors of the Ming and Qin dynasties for annual ceremonies of prayer to heaven for good harvest. And that was kind of like an offering and them asking for a good harvest and things like that. And so again, these are places that emperors and imperial family members and people of very high power would go and visit. And that's what makes these really beautiful structures just as interesting to see, not only just to take that picture, but to experience. And one thing that when you are visiting these places, the buildings themselves, I noticed this, and when I was there and I asked this question, there are a lot of the doorways you have to step over. There's not like an open doorway. So when you're going through a doorway, there's a bar or a piece of wood or a blocking. So you're kind of stepping over into the doorway versus just walking through. And I remember thinking that was a little odd. Why wouldn't they just have the doorway open? And so I asked, and it was because that they believed that it would keep spirits out, because spirits didn't have feet, didn't have legs, so they wouldn't be able to cross those thresholds. So there's certain rooms that you have to actually step into that don't allow spirits in. So I thought that was really kind of interesting. And it's not the architecture alone is brilliant and something to marvel at by going. And I just highly recommend these three places if you're going over. This is definitely a trip I think that you should take in your 30s just because of the amount of walking. You can get a rickshaw, which is always neat, but there's so many other things around the area in China, and specifically in Beijing, that you can check out. I mean, there's always the Nest, the National Stadium, because one of the Summer Olympics was there. You can go to a number of museums, number of different temples. If the Great Wall was that impactful to you, you can go to different sections of the Great Wall and walk on it, so you may want to check that out. But that's really the number one thing that I highly, highly recommend, on top of so many other things, the Marco Polo Bridge. I mean, I could just go through so many. Beijing is an incredible city. Not only that, you're going to want to experience the market streets and tasting the foods and walking through. I enjoyed haggling too. That might be a young person's game too, because I was getting things, and if you love to haggle, there are certain areas in the city, like Marketplace, that you can go to, and it's just, for me, it was a ton of fun. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure I was getting the right price for the things that I was purchasing, and so I enjoyed it thoroughly. But those are definitely trips that you should take in your 30s. And if you do have time, and you're in China, you can catch an overnight train, or even if you can jump on a quick flight and go to Hong Kong, or even go to Shanghai. So those are all within reach if you're in the area. So again, China is a extremely great place, but there's a lot of outdoors things to do. I mean, there are with everything, I feel, or not everything, but most places you're going to go, and it's just kind of how you want to choose. But those iconic historical sites in Beijing are going to require a little bit more. And I think they're completely worth it. And if you aren't in your 30s and you're hearing this, man, go for it. If you got that energy, absolutely don't hold back. Don't hold back. All right, well, coming up after the break, I'm going to jump into a trip that maybe you might want to think about more if you're in your 40s. So stick around.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. We were just talking about a trip that I recommended that you take when you're in your 30s, and that was a trip to the Great Wall in Beijing, China. I also recommended a couple other spots that you should visit when and while you're in China. But jumping ahead a little bit, as we get older, we're still looking to travel, and we should always continue to travel. So this segment, I'm going to go through a trip that I recommend doing if you're in your 40s or a little bit older in your 30s. And that is going to Italy. Now, you're saying, well, Italy's really big and you can go to Italy at any age. And yes, that's true. And after you get through in your Italian trip or with one other trip going through the big cities, okay, Venice, Rome, Florence, doing those big 3 cities there, you're going to want to get to some of the other places if you haven't, okay? And one that I'm going to recommend is taking a trip to Cinque Terre. That's right, Cinque Terre. It means 5 lands. It's the coastal area in northwest Italy. It's a coastline of 5 villages, and the surrounding hillsides are all part of the Cinque Terre National Park. And Cinque Terre dates back to the 1200s. That's how far it goes back, the 1200s. And it's really a very interesting area along the coastline because you have these houses that are stacked upon the hills. So it's very steep and it's very narrow with the lanes. So anywhere that you're traveling in those 5 towns, it's going to be either on inclines or you're going downhill or it's very narrow. So if you have, you're not wanting to walk on stones and cobble stairs and things like that, this might not be the place that you want to check out, but I think it is worth it. And I think it's not too taxing. I think it's moderate. And the other reason, well, there's several reasons that I'm really recommending this. Well, let's just get into a few. The first one, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I just talked about it. Pastel houses, wonderful architecture. They're stacked on top of each other. You can see beautiful blue water right there. They have mountain ranges. You're right on the Mediterranean. So the setting is just, the Italian Riviera at its finest. That's right. Who doesn't want to be in the Italian Riviera? So that's number one. It's absolutely gorgeous. Now, looking at the area, it's very remote getting there. So it takes either about an hour or over an hour driving between the towns because of the mountains. If you take the train, it can take you a much shorter time frame to get there. And there are trains that go directly from some of the bigger cities down into the Italian Riviera, so you can look into those. So if you're not renting a car or you're not, backpacking and things like that, you can jump on a train, or there are other accommodations and ways to get there. So getting there, it takes a little extra effort there. And usually with those types of trips, when you have to, it's not as easily accessible as some of the other areas or to get to. It causes us to think that we're going to spend a lot more money on travel, and some people don't like that. But I think it's worth it to check this out. Now, you're going to, like I said, these are coastal towns, so when you think about going down there, things have to be brought in, and it's difficult. So it's going to be pricier. So they only allow a certain amount of cars into those towns to drop off supplies. So there's not a lot of traffic as far as vehicles in those towns along the roads. Most people are coming by boats or ferries, or they're coming by the trains, and there's not a lot. So you have to keep that in mind. And when things are imported, or had to be brought in special, that means prices are going to be a little bit higher. So if you are on the hostel or backpackers guide or budget, this one is going to be a little bit pricier for you. So you're going to want to have to budget for that. Now, I will say this as far as accommodations. There are a few accommodations, like hostel type places, that you can find there. You have to look for them, but there are a few. But most of the dining or accommodations you're going to find in these towns are going to be on the more expensive side. If you're in the Italian Riviera, you should be expecting to spend some money anyway. And I'm going to say that you won't regret it at all. So you can find wonderful and unique accommodations, which is also another perk to being in such a remote area or these smaller towns. Now, again, we talked about it being on the coastline. And with it being the coastline, seafood is king. That's right. Whenever you have any of those towns or any of those cities that you visit that are on the coast, you will notice a lot more seafood because it's right there, and that's it's accessible. And the brilliant thing about that is that you are eating things that are fresh, caught that day, and specifically in an area like this where you don't have large amounts of chains or massive amounts of people in some of the other Italian cities, major cities. It's a little bit smaller. Even if there's a large crowd, you're not going to have quite as many, and you're just going to enjoy it a little bit more, in my opinion. And one thing that is very local down there, and I have not tried this, and I'm not a fan of this food. It's a seafood, and many of us think probably you're probably going to feel your face like cringe a little bit when I say this, but anchovies. Anchovies is a big thing down there, and I know some of you just went, anchovies. But because I do the same thing. I'm going to recommend you try this. I haven't gotten a chance to yet, but I really would love a chance to try the anchovies there because it's a staple food right there. It's also been a staple food since Roman times. So it's very popular. It's done very well. And they say it is delicious. And they marinate it in lemon and olive oil, and then they batter and fry it. And right there, when you kind of add how they cook it, to me, I'm like, ooh, I would definitely try that. Because my brain automatically jumps to anchovies on pizzas and things like that, and I don't like anchovies on pizzas. And maybe it's just because I've never had the fresh anchovies. Now, these are going to be caught that day, or they're going to be fresh from the sea. So I think it's worth it to try that. It's not like something coming from a can that you would get at a store and just, But that is a staple. It sounds delicious. It's always recommended to try it. Along with the limoncello there, you want to try that as well. So you're going to eat well, you're going to drink well, and you're by the sea. What more could you ask for already? And again, we talk about the accessibility and the pricing with it. It is not as budget friendly like we talked about earlier as most most areas that you might be able to get to in Italy are. This is the Italian Riviera. It just screams for a little bit more. Now, earlier I was talking about how things are a little bit more narrow with the streets, and there's a lot more hills because they're on the coastal lines there, and you have the mountains. So getting around, you're going to be doing a little bit more hiking. They say one of the best things to do when you're there is to forget about being in a car or anything like that, and if you want to, take a train or hike between the towns. If you are really adventurous, it's a lot longer, a little bit more work, but I heard is worth it. And some of you that are avid outdoors people, this might be something that you want to do. Now, you can jump back and forth between the towns via train, and it's much quicker to do that. But you might be missing some of the sights that you wouldn't get to see if you were taking the hikes. And if you wanted just to jump between the towns via train and then hike around the area, it's still just as good. You're going to have a lot of trails and also a lot of vineyards and places to walk to that you can't get to by car. So again, this is another reason why I'm recommending it more in your 30s or 40s, really more to your 40s, because it has a little bit more of that. I'm going to spend a teeny bit more on my trip, so it's more on the expensive side. So a lot of times, some of us are fortunate to hit a successful career or things earlier in our lives. Some of us, it takes a little bit more time. And like me, I decided to just kind of go crazy in my early 20s. And then I started to really gain responsibility and manage myself a little bit better, where I was able to take a little more expensive trips or longer trips, away from work as I got older. So that's another reason why I recommend this as a later trip for you to take, because it does have that element of relaxing just as well as it has that element of adventure. And speaking of adventure, you do not want to leave this place without getting a chance to get into the Mediterranean. Now, personally, I don't want to ever leave any part of that area without getting into the Mediterranean. So I'm one that loves the water. So I'm going to get a chance and get in there and swim. And I've read countless testimonies and people's TripAdvisor regrets about when they went down there, they didn't go swimming and they instantly regretted it. And a lot of people, as they get older, the water's fantastic, but when you have seas and things and it's a little rougher, sometimes you want to just veg out a little bit. You don't want to deal with getting in the water and swimming and things like that. So that's another recommendation. And what is a trip to the Italian Riviera without seeing a beautiful, beautiful sunset? That's right. You're going to want to find a spot to watch that gorgeous, gorgeous sunset. And there are literally dozens of viewpoints around the coast that you can hike to or walk to or get to by some form of transportation if you don't want to use your legs. But most of the places you're probably going to have to walk to see that gorgeous sunset. So that is something that is, again, highly, highly recommended. So we're looking at a lot of hiking. We're looking at a lot of eating. We're looking at a lot of back and forth. I mean, there are literally 5 towns. So you're going to be wanting to spend time in each of those towns because they all have something unique about them. And again, it's kind of a 5-for-1 deal when you go here. And yes, the Amalfi Coast is technically part of that area. So you, again, are talking a little bit more of an expensive trip when you're going down there. One of the last things I want to make sure that I mention before we leave this segment, before our break, is an activity that you can do anywhere in Italy, but I think that food being such a prominent thing, especially along the coastline with the seafood and everything else, you don't want to miss a chance to jump into an Italian cooking class. There are several classes. Most of them range between 2 to 3 hours, and it's done by an expert chef, and they take you to the local market, and you get to see all the seafood and smell things and pick out your vegetables. It's really an incredible, incredible experience, and I know some of us are just like, once we get to a certain point on a trip, we just decide, no, I just want to go sit down, enjoy my food. I cook plenty at home. Yeah, but how many times do you get a chance to cook in the Italian Riviera with an expert chef when you're picking fresh produce and seafood and protein? I mean, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So, and for all you adventure seekers out there, if you're not wanting to spend that time in the kitchen, get a mountain bike and tour, on a mountain bike up and down. Or you can even rock climb. So there's a lot of adventure things. Me personally, I'm going to stick more to things like horseback riding and the food and wine scene, and also swimming in that Mediterranean. Those are going to be my specific things that I look at. So you're not going to want to miss that, all right? So like I said, Cinque Terre is a brilliant, brilliant trip. I highly recommend it, especially if you get into your 40s. It's a moderate type of excursions that you have to deal with as far as walking and elevation, and it is completely worth it. And at that point, you may be a little bit more open or easier to stretching your pocketbook. So stick with us, because when we come back, I'm going to give you one more trip that you might want to take a little bit later, maybe if you're in your 50s or older. And make sure to stay till the end of the show so you can hear my top 10 most expensive trips to take. So don't go anywhere.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. We were just talking about a trip to take in your 40s, or a good trip that you might want to think about taking in your 40s if you haven't already done it at that point. And that was a trip to the Italian Riviera, specifically going to Cinque Terre. And remember, meaning the 5 lands, so 5 different coastal towns. Really beautiful. So, again, highly recommended. But we're going to get into now for another adventurous trip. And this trip is a trip that I would recommend if you are a little older, in your 50s or older, maybe in your 40s. It's definitely something that you're going to want to do one of 2 ways. And that trip is going to Antarctica. And I know I could do an entire hour on going to Antarctica, but we're going to try to get a little condensed version in this segment for you. And I'll probably revisit this in a little bit more detail. But I think everyone has Antarctica on their bucket list to go to. But it's one of those places that is extremely difficult to get to and requires one of 2 things. You can do it going and getting a very expensive trip down there on one of the boats, the cruise boats, or you can go work in Antarctica. And yes, you can actually work in Antarctica. There are places that there's a lot of science experiments and things going on down there. They need a lot of people down there, and there's different seasons, and you can apply to go down. And I believe they are about 6 months, 5 to 6 months time period of commitment that you have to, at least I think minimum commitment and things like that. But if you're interested in that, you should go online and check into that. But the other way that I'm going to be talking about is when you're in your 50s or older, or maybe even in your 40s, most of us are not really wanting to go down to Antarctica and work if we're not a scientist. We want to go enjoy, explore, and just experience that part of the world. And you have to do it simply by getting a flight down to Ushuaia in South America. And once you get down there, you get a chance to really spend some time checking out that little town. Most trips will give you about a day or two in Ushuaia to see the area and really explore. It's kind of a very neat little town. It's very unique in its own sense. Of course, most people that are traveling or coming through there that are not local are going to Antarctica or getting on one of those boats. It's one of the only way to get down there. You have to get, unless you just have money that coming out your ears and you can just get some kind of charter your own boat or something like that, and fly down that way. But most people will go into Ushuaia and they'll stay a night and they'll get a chance to experience for about a day and a half the town there. And then you'll go through a company and they'll load you on basically a cruise ships. And these are not the typical massively large cruise ships that you can get so many people. They are big, but they are very limited. They're strong, they're sturdy, they're great because they have to be. I mean, to get on those ships, you have to be willing to, one, say that I'm okay with going through the Drake Passage. And you can skip the Drake Passage altogether and fly from Ushuaia down to Antarctica. But that's some of the adventure that I like about taking the ship. And for those of you that don't know about the Drake Passage, it is considered one of the roughest sea areas to travel on by boat. And depending the time of year that you're going down there, it could be a really rough boat ride, or it could be very smooth. I've done some research and heard testimonies or read testimonies of people that were rocked all night and their cabins and things were thrown about. And then others that didn't really have a strange or experience or too rough of an experience on the trip, and it was really nice for them. So it just kind of depends the season, and you never know. I mean, the sea can be very fickle sometimes, but the Drake Passage is considered one of the world's roughest areas of seas to be traveling on. And the one thing that you will read about when you're researching for many of the companies that go down to Antarctica is that you have to be flexible. And that is sometimes hard for us, especially when we're a little bit younger. I tend to think that being flexible, we really want our trip to go the way we want it. I think everyone wants their trip to go the way they want it, but as we get older, we understand a little bit more and can be a little bit more flexible with our time frame and things like that. So that's the one thing that you have to be aware of. Is the flexibility because of the weather and the area that you're traveling in. There could be days that when you go down there that you won't get to be able to step on land, or they just become maybe icebergs and things floating. You won't be able to do certain activities that were set for that day. So your itinerary can be shifted a little bit as you go through. But I did want to recommend one company that I have looked at and talked with extensively. They look to be a fantastic company. And if I was ever to go down there, this is who I would want to go with. And they're a company called Polar Latitudes. Polar Latitudes has been doing this a long time. They, or not too long, but they started the company in 2010, and they are very well versed in the area and traveling to Antarctica. And it's a really great company. They even give you a winter jacket that you have. Now you have to, and boots that you will give back. The jacket you get to keep, but the boots you get to borrow. And outside of that, you have to provide all your own clothing. They also have payment plans, because we'll get into the pricing and stuff in a little bit. But before we kind of get the downer of pricing, let's look at what kind of itineraries you're expecting to get. Most of the itineraries are going to be anywhere between 12 to all the way up to 21, 22 days. So you're probably going to be looking at about almost 2 weeks for this trip because of how long it takes by boat and the uncertainty and all the areas that you're going to be going. So some of the best trips, you can spend about 12 days, I think, is the minimum. So it's about 10 nights or 13 days, 10 nights on board the ship. And there are different packages, so for those of you that are going down there, this is also something that you're going to have time for. And I know a lot of us, in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, when we're working a lot, or our schedules are a little bit more hectic, it's hard to take off almost 3 weeks just to travel. Because that's just being down there, if you think about it. That's not even getting down to South America and then getting on the ship. So you have to have time, and that's why I'm recommending this as a trip in your 40s or 50s or maybe even a little older. So that's for starters. So once you have your itinerary, you have a plethora of things to do. There are days that's just going to be on the ship, but their ship has libraries and theaters and class dining, world-class dining, and they have entertainment at night so you can have drinks, and you kind of become a little family for 2 weeks with everyone in the ship. And it looks just really, really fantastic. It's a way to bond. But there are a lot of different highlights once you get down to Antarctica. So a couple of the highlights that at least that Polar Latitude with this company specifically offers within their company is several different programs you can look into on the trip. One of them is called the Polar Latitude Citizen Science Program. And this is where guests partake in data gathering activities that support major research projects. And I think that is fantastic, and it is extremely interesting to do. You are helping out scientists and being a part of the reason that we're down there to learn, educate, and find out things. And so there are several different things that you can do and that they will introduce to you that you get to help. Some having to do with climate change, others with biology. You just have to, depending on when you're going, you'll have to see what's offered. But those, taking samples, it's great. It's a really neat experience for you to feel what scientists are doing down there and be part of that. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing that you can do is they have a lot of professional photography classes that you can get into. There's a lot of people that love going down there, and that's one of the things people love about Antarctica and some of those really distant destinations is the pictures that you can get, and the photography is amazing down there. The whale watching and the seals and the penguins and just the glaciers and everything. It's very gorgeous. And so they actually have a professional coach that'll help you no matter what your skill level is. So it doesn't matter if you're using that iPhone or if you're getting one of those GH5 cameras or whatever high level camera you're going to bring down there. There is something for everyone. Another adventure with this company that I love, that this would be my choice. Actually, I want to do them all, but this would be my choice, and that is kayaking. You can participate in a kayak, but you have to be over 16 and in good health with a basic paddling experience. So if you are completely new to it and it's something that you're not quite sure you're interested in, but you'd like to try it, I wouldn't recommend it on this trip. That water's cold. Now, typically they can get up to about 20 participants per voyage, and it's a good amount of people, so you're going to be in a group. And they offer a mix of tandem and single kayaks with dry suits, paddles, personal flotation devices, gloves, and booties. So they offer all the equipment that you would need to have. I mean, of course, you'd have whatever you normally wear out that you'd wear when you're outside anyway in Antarctica, but you'd also have the dry suits and everything like that, just in case you go into the water. And one thing about this company that I really loved when researching them was finding out that they do a lot of educational seminars or talks. They have safety checks and talk to you about what to do in certain situations. They also have certain discussions and lectures about the biology and the landscape of Antarctica and things like that you're going to be experiencing. So, and this is usually done on the trip during the days that you are at sea. And so it gives you a little something to do. There's little activities, so you're not necessarily by yourself, because it can feel when you're on a ship for a few days, especially when it's limited people, like you're really in the middle of nowhere. And if you're like me, I love to talk to people. I love to interact. So kayaking, definitely something that I would want to do. Along with this, and guys, I just want to do it all. But another activity is camping. And yes, you can camp. It's outside camping. So they offer, where they provide you with the sleeping bags and dry stuff that you would need and all the things for your camp out, and they take you ashore and you actually get to camp. Now, the thing about the camping that you have to think about is also what time of the year you're traveling down there. Is it dark where it's dark most of the day, or are you traveling like in the summer, I believe, when it's like light most of the day? So you just check your seasons, because if you're like me, when it's light out, it's very difficult to sleep. But when you're that cold, maybe you just might curl up and cover your face. Now, you have to be at least 12 years or older to go on the camp out. And they say it's a pretty rough night because you are sleeping on ice. So, everyone asks about, toilets and things like that. Well, bathrooms they actually have a portable bathroom that they have, but it is outside. And to me, that's actually kind of cool, because they put it in an area, but you have to just know that you're just outside and, going in nature, right? So I think that's kind of funny. Those are a couple activities that you can do. I know this company also allows you to jump in the water. They have kind of where they attach a bungee to you or a rope, and you jump off this little dinghy boat into the water, and it's like an instant jump in. It's like a polar plunge. Again, my style may not be yours. If you're 50 or older or things like that, jumping into ice cold water might not be for you, but it's something, no matter what age I get to, that I would like to try, just saying I did it. So those are a couple things that you can look forward to along this trip, along with fantastic amenities. I mean, some of these ships have their own heated pools, spas. I mean, you're eating really well. There's bars and events at night, so there's a lot of fantastic things. And now let's jump to the price, because, everything is not free. And when you're going this route, it is going to cost you a little bit extra. So they do have a payment plan, but usually their base rate, depending on where you are in the cabin, and I'm going to look at the cheapest option. I'm going to let you guys know the cheapest option. Usually if you're traveling between December 20th and January 1st, it's going to be about $10,000 to $11,000. And you're like, woo, that's a lot. But again, that's another reason why I'm recommending this trip as someone older. Maybe finances aren't as big a deal for you at that point, or you've had time to save up. It may be that bucket list trip that you're saving up for. Now, there are other options that you can get even cheaper than that. I believe the cheapest is time to go, especially with this company, is probably around March, the February 25th to March 17th, in that realm. You're going to spend about anywhere between $7,000 to $10,000, to go on it. But they do have payment plans. That was one thing that I really liked about them. And if you book ahead, you get a significant discount if you're booking about a year in advance. So that's another thing about this trip that you have to think about and consider. But Antarctica is on everyone's bucket list. I'm sure it is. If it's not, you ought to check it out. It's just one of those places that I think you will just be in awe going. And how many of you guys out there can say you've been to all 7 continents? Not as many as we thought. Well, there you go. There's a trip for your 50s or older that I recommend. There's not as much movement around, and it's a little more subdued, but it does take a little bit more moolah to get there. Stick with us, because when we come back, I'm going to give you my top 10 most expensive trips.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, everyone. We were just discussing a great trip to take if you're in your 50s or older, which was a trip to Antarctica. A little bit more, less worried about that wallet and a little bit more interested and a very unique bucket list trip. So that's where that recommendation came in. Something I hoped I get to do. But as promised, for those of you that have stuck here with me to the end, I am going to give you my top 10 trips that are the most expensive trips you can take. So let's get right into this list. Some of these you may not agree with. I went back and forth on a couple of them when I was going through this list. Many of these are not going to surprise you, but let's just see. It'll be fun. Number 10, Tokyo, Japan. And Tokyo is a very expensive city, as are all these places that we're going to talk about. Just in general, any of those high metropolitan types of cities tend to carry a little bit more weight with how expensive they are. It has the largest metropolitan economy in the world, and it's very modern and nightlife and very large business districts that are there, and especially when you have Old Tokyo and other areas, it's a fascinating city, and it's drawing so many people to it. Tokyo is just one small example of how much art and business and everything are infused together within the town. But let me tell you again, it's not cheap. It's not cheap. When I was there, I remember spending a lot more on the taxi ride from the airport to our hotel than I did on actual dinner that night, if that says anything to you. And they estimate about a 4-star hotel is going to cost you roughly around $300 per night. And that, to some of us, is not too bad, but those of us on a budget, that price kind of hurts a little bit. But that's why this one's at number 10, because it's not necessarily unreasonable in my opinion, but the dollar is weakening a little bit with the yen, so it might work out in our favor. So Tokyo's number 10. Number 9, we're going to go back to Italy, and I know we've mentioned things in Italy, but we didn't talk about this specifically. Tuscany. Tuscany, Italy makes my list at number 9. It's one of the most expensive regions in Italy. The fact that, people visit Rome, Naples, Florence, and Venice, and they all say that those are really expensive cities. Well, I actually think, and many people would agree, that Tuscany can be a little bit more appealing, which is why people get to Tuscany, and being a little more remote makes things a little more expensive. So not only do you have the history, but you just get yourself the experience of being in a Tuscan villa. And that's the other thing. Most of these areas that you are staying in Tuscany are villas. They are ancient and things that have just been converted into lavish suites for tourists that want to pay for a high dollar. So be careful of that, because most of the places out there you're going to find are going to be very unique and very cool, but also it can stretch that wallet a little bit. So you're going to want to look at that, because some of these prices might shock you a little bit. It can cost somewhere around $3,000 to $4,000 a week to stay in a Tuscan village out there in Tuscany. So if you're with a group, this might be kind of a neat group thing to do if you're wanting to really experience that. And you're going to need a car to get around, and you're going to just want to go everywhere. So it's going to be a pricey European vacation. So just be ready for that one. Number eight is Copenhagen, Denmark. That's right. Has so many Michelin-starred restaurants that right away you start thinking the food and the restaurants and the scene. It's just, you're going to pay high dollar for that. There's clubs that stay open all night. It's very diverse. Now, there are accommodations in Copenhagen that you can find that aren't as expensive. But again, you're going to have to look for those. But between all the modern historical things and the experiences, you're going to spend a little bit of money there in Copenhagen. Like I said, it's got amazing Michelin-starred restaurants. And the weather, if you go in the summertime around June, it is some of the most beautiful weather that you can experience up there. That's when I got a chance to be there in Copenhagen, and I will never forget it. It also has that history of the Vikings and things like that. So if you are a history buff and like that, this is just going to draw you to it. But just be prepared to spend a little bit of dough. Number 7. Well, 6 and 7 I'm going to kind of put interchangeably. I had these going back and forth. So number 7, I put New York City. And New York City, just in general, is one of the most expensive cities in the U.S. when you're traveling to. Depending where you're staying and if you're in the city, and most tourists that come will stay close to Times Square, or if they want to stay by the park, it's even more expensive, depending if you're uptown. But if you're in one of those touristy areas, it's going to cost you a couple $100 a night just for a hotel. So you're going to spend quite a bit of money. So a weekend stay in New York is probably going to run you anywhere between $1,200 to $1,500 just on a hotel. Now that can vary depending, again, where you're staying. But if you're just going for a weekend, you could probably spend about that just on your accommodations. That's not even including your flight, or if you're getting tickets to a show or doing something or going out to dinner, because New York has endless possibilities. I don't have to tell you guys. I used to go up to visit family, so I would go into the city and experience stuff, so I was never paying for those, because when I was a lot younger, going back and forth up there a bunch, it just was too expensive. But for those of you that are just diehard NYC fans and you want to do it all, go for it, but just be prepared to pay. Number 6, this is where I was going back and forth with New York, is I put Paris at number 6, Paris, France. And Paris is a gorgeous and beautiful city, wonderful people. I don't care what they say. I loved when I was visiting Paris. I met so many wonderful people, and I did a lot of traveling and exploring on my own. Even though I was there visiting a friend, I got a chance to really explore the Rodin Garden and find different spots around the city that I might not have found if I was just randomly looking. So Paris is a very neat and unique city for many different ways. Cultural hub, city of romance, the starving artist, right? All of that. And you're going to eat so well. And there are ways to go to Paris and it not cost so much. There is. But if you want that Parisian lavish experience, you're going to have to pay for it. And that's all there is to say about that. It's Paris. The euro is expensive over there. All right, let's get into my top 5. All right, I know you guys have been waiting around for this. So just to recap, number 10, Tokyo. Number 9, Tuscany. I actually left out. Number 8, Copenhagen. Number 7, New York City. Number 6, Paris, France. And that brings us to our top 5. All right, so here we go. Number 5. Fiji. That's right, Fiji. I know, shocked. It's an island, right? Fiji isn't just one island. It's actually a series of islands. It's 332 islands to be exact. And Fiji is renowned for one of the best travel destinations in the South Pacific. Got that gorgeous blue water, those overwater bungalows, the island life. It's so remote that it is so expensive. But the resorts on the island are 5-star, and you are just treated to a relaxing luxurious beach vacation when you go. And part of the reason that makes Fiji so desirable is because how remote it is. And that also is what drives the price. So you are going to be spending a lot of money if you are going to Fiji. I will say I've never been to Fiji specifically, but going to Bora Bora and those areas, you're still spending money. And honorable mention for Bora Bora in the top 5. It didn't make it in my list only because I've talked about this in a previous podcast. But Fiji is incredible as far as the pictures go, and going to those islands out there, it is exactly what the pictures show you. So Fiji makes my number 5. Number 4. Antarctica. We had just talked about this in the last segment, but again, with the price and what it costs to get down there and the ship and everything else and the time you are paying for, Antarctica makes my top 5 list at number 4. You're having to almost get more for the trip on top of paying for the trip, because you have to make sure you have the right clothes, and you can't just say, well, I'll pack a couple warm sweaters. Not unless you're going to wear like 8 of them, right? So you have to have the proper clothes and things that you want to take down there. A lot of people like to get a really great camera, and they feel like that is the time that they want to buy that. You know, so if you're getting new equipment and new clothes and things like that, it's a very unique trip. So the price in general can run you, like we talked about earlier, anywhere between $8,000 to $10,000 on the cheaper side. So if you're staying almost 3 weeks or a month or anything like that, it's going to run you anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000 just to go down to Antarctica. Now, it'll be an amazing trip, but it is definitely one of the more expensive things and expensive trips to take, and one that you're going to want to put some money away for, or just make it that blowout bucket list trip that you're going to want to take. Number 3. Necker Island. Now, Necker Island is in the British Virgin Islands, and now I've made trips down to the British Virgin Islands, and it is not the most expensive place to go, but Necker Island specifically, if you're wanting to vacation like a U.S. president, that's where you want to go. So there's a lot of things you can do down there: scuba diving, water skiing, sailing. You know, it's an island, so there's plenty of things to do and activities. And the thing about Necker Island is that the starting rate to stay on that island in the British Virgin Islands is about $80,000 per night. That is the starting rate. So right away, I don't know about you, but I have a hard time trying to spend that much money on a place. But if you can, it's supposed to be the most incredible place ever. You can take up to 34 guests. Okay, so, that can be accommodated for that price. So it doesn't have to be $80,000 per person. That can be up to 34 guests. So that kind of balances out a little bit, but you're still going to be looking at a hefty price going down there. But you're going to be traveling and living in style while you're on vacation. All right, we're into my top 2. So starting with number 2, the number 2 most expensive place to travel. Fogo Island Inn in Canada. That's right. It is not a cheap place. It's hard to get to, and usually you'll find that most of these in my top 5 are a little more remote and harder destinations to travel to. It takes a little bit more. But if you want to go to Fogo Island in Canada, it's a little boutique hotel, and it's on a remote island. It's a remote island in Newfoundland, Canada. You can either take a timely journey to get there, or if you have the money, you can charter a helicopter ride, which sounds awesome to me. Once you get there, the guests actually get to join a sponsorship program. It's where they are matched with locals to understand the area's culture and learn about things with the island. And so instead of just relax in a hotel, in a pool or something, you get to really interact with people there. And it's one of the most exclusive lodgings that you can stay at. They don't tell you the price. It's only revealed upon request, but it's rumored to be somewhere around $3,000 or more a night. $3,000 or more a night. There's celebrities and many people that have stayed there, so it's pretty exclusive. So if you get a chance to do that trip, you're going to be in a small handful of people that have stayed there. So I think that's pretty cool. All right, my number one most expensive place to travel to. Seychelles, that's right. Seychelles, shocker, it's an island. But like Fiji, it's composed of not one, but several islands. It's located in the Indian Ocean. And the island is a private resort with 17 really luxurious villas. And they're all constructed of high-end materials with infinity pools, jacuzzis, and the best thread count of sheets and everything that you can possibly think of. The resorts are committed to preserving nature, so it's what kind of makes Seychelles really desirable for a lot of people. It's so remote, it's 5-star, and they're very big about the nature of preserving the nature and their beaches and things like that, protecting their the landscape, which makes it for a wonderful experience. I mean, you can do things like windsurfing or guided hikes, snorkel, things like that. But villas must be rented for a minimum of 3 days, okay? And the rates usually start around $3,000. Now, that's a lot of money, per day. So if you're having to stay 3 days, you're already spending almost $10,000 just for 3 days at that point. So those are my top 10 most expensive places. Now, there are ways to go to these places on a budget, but if you're really wanting to do it up right, you are going to have to open up that wallet a little bit more. I hope you have been inspired to take a trip this year or look to start planning one. It's never too late to start traveling. It can open your eyes to new experiences, even unlock things about ourselves that we never knew. I believe everyone should travel and explore more of what this world has to offer. It can give us an appreciation and love for so many things. So let's get traveling.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.